Welcome, everybody. We're not going to officially get started until just after 1 o'clock. So if you got to get some things together or anything else, go ahead and do that. Again, we'll officially start just after 1 o'clock. I am here. I'm just not on the camera yet. All right. Hello, everybody. It is officially 1 o'clock. Again, we'll wait just a little bit for those folks who might be coming on a little bit late. But for those who are here already, welcome. Happy to see you all. So once we hit about 101, 102, I'll run you through the various way this is going to go, what we're going to do, all that kind of thing. But I don't want to, accidentally say something and then lots of people miss it. I hope everyone's having a good day so far. It's coming upon that holiday season, so hopefully you're still paying attention. It's okay if you're a little not, that's totally fine. Okay, according to my clock, it is 1:01 and almost 1:02. So let's officially get started. Welcome everyone to Calaveras Big Trees State Park. My name is Lily. If you ever can't remember what's going on here, both those nuggets of information are in my Zoom name. So you can just look down there, you see, oh, right, that's Lily at Calaveras Big Tree State Park. And today we're talking about super animal superpowers. So we're gonna talk all about the animals that live here in the state park. And because of that, we are actually currently inside our visitor center museum. So we'll be showing you around, and it actually worked out pretty well because it is pouring rain all day today. So I'm grateful that we're inside nice and cozy warm. Now, along the way in this program, I will be doing a couple things. I will be asking for reactions. Some of you are already using the reactions. Please use those. I love the reactions. Lots of hearts all of a sudden, great. Please use those. They don't bother me, but let me know that you're understanding what I'm talking about. So I really like those reaction buttons, so keep them coming. Sometimes I'll take a poll of sorts where I ask you to press a reaction button if you think a certain way or anything else. So just pay attention to that. I like to use those reaction buttons. And I do occasionally use polls. I say occasionally because I've found sometimes not everyone can see them and I can't fix that on my end. So we're going to do a bit of a trial poll right now where I'm going to launch the simple question. Have you ever been to Calaveras Big Trees State Park? Now, I'm sure some of you are doing just a big old stream into your classroom. So teachers, if you're doing that, just kind of take a poll on your own and then vote for whatever was the majority. So have you been to Calaveras Big Trees? You can either say yep, nope, maybe, because I know I don't remember all the places I've been to, or maybe you've been here virtually. Maybe you've seen a program with me, or if it was some years ago, somebody else. You can pick any of those. I'll wait to see how many of y'all are able to do it. And again, I can see who's voting in terms of the percentage of people voting. So I'll be able to see if it's not working very well. And as you're voting, I just want to mention a couple other components of a webinar. I cannot hear or see you, and that's on purpose because sometimes we can get many, many people. And that way also, if there are folks that are just live streaming it to a big old class, I'm not prioritizing one person over an entire class. So I can interact with you through these polls, through the reaction buttons, through things like that, but I can't see you or talk with you, and that's okay. That's kind of what we want for something like this. All right, I'll give you maybe another 15 more seconds to vote. It looks like not everyone is potentially able to do polls, so I'm going to keep that in mind. All right, I'm going to end the poll and share the results. And hopefully now you can see that a big old percentage of you, 90% or so, said, nope, you've never been here before. So welcome virtually. And only 10% of you have been here before, so welcome back. So as I said before, we're talking about super animals, superpowers, but we are at Calaveras Big Tree State Park. So I want to introduce you a bit more to the park before we just delve into all the various animal related things. Oh, and then one other thing I want to mention, the Q&A is there, but I don't want you to ask questions in there yet. Hold on to them to the very end, because I will be using the Q&A in kind of a different fashion later on, and so your question is going to get completely lost. So wait until the very end to ask questions. I do leave a chunk of time at the end to answer those. So hold on to them, then put them in the Q&A later. Okay? But I want to tell you a bit more about this park, because maybe you've never heard of it before. And y'all are calling in from I don't even know where. So it's okay if you've never heard of it before, because we're just one state park in a big old wide world. Now, since we're in a California state park, we have to be in California, right? It's in the name. And I have it really zoomed in right now on Google Maps to where I am. I'm going to start zooming out here, and maybe you're going to start recognize a couple areas. Maybe you've heard of Arnold before. Maybe you've heard of, hey, there's Sacramento over there, our state capital. Zoom us out even more. You can see the Bay Area with San Francisco. You can see more of the Central Valley. I'll do one last big zoom out, and there you can see where we are in the whole state of California. Now I'm going to zoom in just a teeny bit more to get you in some details. You might notice that we are relatively close to the border with Nevada. We're not right there, but we're kind of close. We are in the Sierra Nevada mountains that help create that dividing line between our two states, between California and Nevada. We're not the very most top of those mountains. That's why I said we're not like right at the border, but we're kind of close. We're at about the midpoint. We're at about 5,000 feet elevation. And that factoid actually helps explain why this is a state park. State parks are always created to protect something, right? It could be something historic, it could be something very important culturally. For here, this state park was created specifically to protect the giant sequoias, these really amazing trees. This happened way back in 1931. Giant sequoias are very, very picky about where they like to live. They're picky about their habitat. Give me any sort of reaction button. Who here is picky about something? Just give me any reaction you want. Who here is picky? All right, seeing a flood of reactions there. Yeah, I'm gonna raise my hand. I'm very picky too. You can talk to numerous people. They know I'm fairly picky. Giant sequoias are just like you. They are very picky trees. They are only found, at least naturally, on the western slope at that about midpoint of the Sierra Nevada mountains. So if you're looking for a giant sequoia in its natural habitat, you gotta go somewhere roughly within this squiggle right here. And that's it for the whole world. They're only found in that little strip. Very picky trees. And you might have noticed, I kind of scribbled over them, but Yosemite National Park is in there. They have giant sequoias. We have parks actually named after them, Sequoia Kings Canyon National Park and Sequoia National Forest. A bunch of places have been created, at least in part or specifically, to protect these trees. Part of that's because they're so rare. They are technically an endangered species. But a big part of it is that they're big. It's kind of in the name, giant sequoia, right? But these trees are the biggest trees ever. And I've actually been hanging out in front of one until recently, right? We have a burn scar right here. It's an example of a giant sequoia, I do want to say. It's not a real one. It goes all the way to one edge of the room and all the way to the other. They are wide, tall, and then overall huge trees. The widest giant sequoia is about 40 feet across. So using my wingspan here, that would mean it'd take 8 of me to stretch across the widest giant sequoia. Feel free to do a little bit of division math there if you want to figure out my wingspan length. But they're also super tall. And ever since we got this video, I show it every program, so I think it's so cool. A volunteer of ours got some drone footage to go to the very top of a giant sequoia. This was taken, as you can see, a while ago. We don't have any rain. But it has a great comparison of how big this tree is compared to the other trees in the forest. While this park was made to protect these trees, it of course protects everything else as well. It's not like we're only protecting these trees and everything else can just, good luck. We protect the whole forest. And you might see some other trees around here in this video. They look skinnier. They are. They're not giant sequoias. They're other kinds of trees called conifers. That's C-O-N-I-F-E-R. They have the puffy needles and they have cones, and cones carry the seeds of these trees. But we're already hitting the tops of those other kinds of conifers, and we haven't hit the top of this giant sequoia yet. Because we're still going. And finally, we made it all the way to the top. We're about a minute into the video, over a minute in actually, and we finally made it. Giant sequoias aren't the tallest trees ever. That actually goes to its very close relative, the coast redwood. Maybe you've heard of that tree before. They're basically siblings. They do still rank up there as one of the tallest trees. And since we're talking about overall bigness, you add together that really wideness plus the height, that's how you get the overall rough volume of a tree. And therefore, those are the biggest trees ever. But this is about super animal superpowers, not just about giant sequoias. So now that you know a bit more about this park and like what's going on here, I want to show you the rest of this museum. Okay? And the reason why I'm in here. We have a bunch of taxidermy animals. Taxidermy means that these animals are real. All of them are real except for the snakes. They were found dead, unfortunately. Like some of these we know was found because they got hit by a car. So they're taken into a special person called a taxidermist. They know exactly how to clean the animals, how to preserve them, and how to put them in very accurate poses to what they would do in the wild. And lots of museums like these, so people can get a nice up-close look at these animals and see what all lives here, even if you wouldn't maybe see them if you were just walking around the park. Many of these animals I haven't seen in the park. I mentioned they can get close to them. Number one rule of visiting a park and seeing some animals is don't get close to them. They are at their home and they see a big other kind of animal, because we are animals, get close to them. They might freak out, they might get scared, they might get stressed, they could accidentally hurt you. There's many bad things that could happen, and we just want to avoid that. So museums with these taxidermies are a great way to get up close look. So you see them off in the distance, you can remember what they look like, but you also know not to get too close. So with that being said, let's get close to these because we're inside the museum. I'm going to introduce you to them, and then we're going to get into their superpowers. So we have porcupines here, famous for their quills. We have various tree-related animals. Makes sense. You saw those trees in that video. We got that squirrel. We got some birds. We have coyotes here. This one looks definitely like it's in the middle of some sort of howl. We have foxes. Now, we don't have any wolves. I often get that question. If you go back maybe 200 years, we would have wolves. But unfortunately, when more and more people started coming to California due to the gold rush, due to just new opportunities, they killed and or kicked out the wolves because they did not like them. They were scared of them. They thought they might hurt their livestock, or it was just kind of sport to hunt them. So we do still have some wolves in California. They've come back from actually Oregon, but we don't have any in the park. These are related to wolves though, so this is like our next best thing. It's a little hard to see with the lighting. I do apologize, just the way it works, but we got a raccoon up in this tree. You see some more birds and squirrels kind of doing their thing. We have bobcat, smaller than a mountain lion, but definitely bigger than your house cat. Probably our most famous animal, one people ask us most about, the black bear. Now, unfortunately, it gets confusing. We only have black bear in California, but black bears aren't always black. Just like how we can have different hair colors, they can have different hair colors. You can see we got this blonde cub right here with an actual black bear. It gets extra confusing because grizzly bears can also be called brown bears, and we do not have any of those in California. It's the same story as the wolf. We used to have them, but now we don't have any at all. And again, it's for those same reasons: fear, not understanding them, and kind of hunting. So if you see a bear and you're in California, regardless of the color, if it's in the wild, it is a black bear. Let's go down the ground here, see some of these ground critters. We have our state bird, the California quail. And then behind it, maybe you've never heard of that animal before, on its hind legs is an animal called a marten. They're basically a small predator. They go hunting for mice and rats, those kinds of things. We have skunk. Of course, you want to avoid those guys for their stink. And right next to it, we have another critter you want to avoid, the rattlesnake. We have another kind of snake hanging out right by it, the king snake. We have birds of prey, like this great horned owl that's hunting after maybe something like a rabbit. We do have a river that goes through this park. Again, we're not all about giant sequoias. So we have things like this river otter right here. And then finally, you might have noticed it up in the corner before, we have mountain lions. So we have a bunch of animals. We have a big wide forest. And I mentioned we're in the mountains. While I told you it's been pouring rain today, if you were here last year, the year before, it would have been snow. It's just been a lot warmer this year than in past years. We tend to get a lot of snow around here. So with that in mind, with the snow, with the trees, with all these animals, here's what I want y'all to do. If you're by yourself, just kind of think about it. If you got someone next to you, talk to them. If you're in a big old class, talk as a class. But I want you to think of what these animals need to survive in a forest like this. And after you think about it, this is where we're going to use the Q&A in kind of a weird way. I want you to put in your thoughts. I'd like them as a one big chunk if possible. That's why I'm asking you to discuss first into the Q&A. If I get lots of single word responses, it's hard for me to catch all of them. So think to yourself, talk to a partner, talk as a class, think about all the things these animals might need to survive. I have a whiteboard right here that's lovely and blank. I want to fill this up with your thoughts. So I'll give you a few minutes. I'm going to step out of camera again to not distract you. And again, put in the Q&A once you have a nice big chunk of what you think these animals might need to survive. still have time to discuss, but I'm starting to see some answers go into the Q&A. So take your time. I'm gonna write them down here, then I'll tell you what everyone else said. And I'll click answer live so you can read them yourself if you'd like. Seeing lots of good long answers. Thank you for following my directions. I do really appreciate that. Makes it a lot easier for me. All right, if you haven't done so yet, go ahead and put in the Q&A what you think. Ooh, yep. Okay. Hopefully I got pretty much everybody. If you haven't, I still have the Q&A open so you can put it in. But look at how fat my whiteboard got with all your answers. So we have many repeated answers, which just emphasizes how important they are. The top three, I'd say, is food, water, and shelter. Some of you got specific. Some said shelter from animals. Some of you said shelter to keep them warm. Or maybe the shelter could be caves or nests. Absolutely. Air was another big one. I see another vote for air in the Q&A, and sleep. Many of you mentioned sleep. That's definitely important. Some of you also noticed some like specifics. Maybe they would need trees. Maybe they would need soil, depending on what their habitat is like. Y'all agreed about space. Space is very important. I put safety kind of broadly because many of you mentioned some specific safety examples, like maybe wildfires or how to deal with snow, but overall they need to feel safe and secure. And y'all also mentioned adaptations. Spoiler alert, I call those super animal superpowers, but we're actually talking about adaptations overall. So let's talk about adaptations. Give me any sort of reaction you want. Who here has heard of the term adaptation before? All right, I'm seeing a pretty steady stream. So an adaptation is basically a superpower. That's why I kind of call this program Superpowers to have that same idea. An adaptation is any sort of characteristic or trait to help a living thing survive. And sometimes they can be pretty cool. And now when I say characteristic or trait, I'm just trying to say that it doesn't have to be a permanent thing. It could be behavior. It could be a permanent thing. It could be a physical characteristic, could be something overall about them. So let me give an example. Go ahead, show each other your thumbs. Prove to each other that you all have thumbs. Okay? Thumbs, and you can use the thumbs up on the screen too, that works as well. But thumbs are a permanent physical adaptation for humans and some other animals. The reason why it's adaptation is because it helps us survive in our environment. Might not be obvious, but since we can grab onto things really well with our thumbs, that means we're very good at using tools. Because we can use tools, we can build fires to keep ourselves warm. It's easier to cook, easier to just build buildings. Thumbs are a great example of a permanent physical adaptation that us humans have. So what I'm going to do is we're going to go through this list. I'm going to pick out, I'll try to pick as many of these as I can and talk about an adaptation that covers one or multiple of these with these animals. But since we also are calling this superpowers, I want to do something fun for every adaptation we talk about. I want us to do a superhero pose for every time we talk about one of these superpowers. So go ahead and think of what you want to do, and then go ahead and show each other what you're going to do for your superpower pose. I'm going to do this one. This is kind of a classic. This is my superpower pose. And I'll remind you to do this after every example of an adaptation or a superpower that we talk about. Okay? So the first one I want to talk about, looking at our list here, I put it on the floor, which is why I'm looking down, is food and water and sleep and shelter. And we're going to talk about, and dealing with snow. We're covering a lot with this one. We talk about the bear. So let's nestle up nice and close with the bear. You can see it looking right at us. Bears are pretty famous for their hibernation. Maybe y'all have heard of that before. Hibernation is when they say, forget it for the winter time. In the winter around here and other places where they hibernate, it is too cold for them. There's not a lot of food. So why bother staying awake? Might as well sleep all the way through it. It's all about finding a nice cozy shelter. So this could be a cave. It could also just be a big fallen tree. We don't have lots of caves around here that bears can go into pretty easily. So it could be a fallen over tree. It could be a nice kind of nook by a cliff. It could be a big old bushy area, but a nice, secure, sheltered location to keep themselves nice and warm so they can sleep. But they can't just sleep. Give me a reaction, and teachers, again, if you're in a classroom, just kind of take a little poll. Who here has eaten something the day before, gone to sleep, and then still woken up hungry? Who here has done that? Give me a reaction. I know I do that all the time. I'm always hungry in the morning. I don't really understand people who skip breakfast. I know a lot of people do, but I don't understand it. We are warm-blooded animals. So are bears, so are any other mammal or bird, so anything that has fur or feathers. Because we're warm-blooded, we always need to eat. We're keeping our insides a nice, consistent, warm temperature. It's always warm. Sometimes it's too warm, like if you're sick. And that can be pretty handy. That means we can kind of go outside when it's cold, go outside when it's hot. We'll just shiver or sweat, but we're overall pretty, consistent on the inside. Problem is, we have to continually add fuel to our insides to make that work. We have to keep eating. Even when we're sleeping, we're using food to keep our insides nice and warm. So bears can't just sleep. They have to prepare. They have to have food nearby in some way. And since they're sleeping, their nearby food is just fat. They can get ridiculously fat to prepare for the winter. In general, the fatter the bear, the more extreme the winter. So around here, since especially this year, winter hasn't been much at all, they're not super fat, but these bears, these are brown bears found in Alaska, they can get absolutely huge. This is the same bear in just 2 months. Look at how big they get. Because if you're in Alaska, that's a long, harsh winter. You want to be able to sleep, use up the food in your fat, and then when you wake up, you want there to be food around. You don't want to wake up hungry and it's, let's say, March, still winter time for them, and there's no food around. So this is not only something that's kind of silly to think about how fat they get and how quickly they get it, but also survival technique. And in terms of adaptations, if we gorged ourselves in food as much as these bears do in those 2 months, they get really sick. Like you might need to throw up after you eat all that food. They can do that though. They can handle it because they know they need to do that to survive their hibernation. Also, we talked about water. We usually think about fat in terms of food, but fat also can store water. So they have lots of water reserves in their fat, and they can use that as they sleep. So I'm going to share a gross fact with y'all. I always have to do this because I think it's so weird. When bears hibernate, when they sleep, they don't get up for most anything. That includes using the bathroom. They hold it the whole time they hibernate, which is really gross, but also an amazing superpower adaptation, because if we did that, we would die. Like, I'm not even joking. It's very toxic for you to hold it in, which is why usually you just have to go, even if there's maybe not a bathroom around. They can hold it the whole time though, and it doesn't make their insides all toxic. Not only that, but let's say there's not enough water in their fat. They can reuse the water that's in their pee, in their bladder, get more out of it, and then put it back in the bladder. It's wild, it's weird. I think that this whole concept of them hibernating and all the weird stuff they can do to hibernate is worthy of a superpower pose. So please, for me, for your classmates, from whoever's with you, do your superpower pose for the bear. It's hibernating and all the weird stuff that goes along with it. Love it. All right. So we have that. I feel like with talking about this hibernation, with the sleep, food, water, space, all that good stuff, I also want to actually talk about snakes. To be honest, I really like to do this because people don't know a whole lot about snakes, I found at least. So we have our lovely snake friend right here. And of course, we also have the rattlesnake. It's just over there. You can't quite see it. So we're going to use this king snake instead. Snakes are cold-blooded. I introduced you before to the idea of warm-blooded. So our insides are always warm, no matter if it's hot, cold, whatever outside. We're consistent, but we keep needing to eat because of it. Snakes, other reptiles, we're talking lizards, we're talking tortoises, you know, those sorts of scaly animals, amphibians like frogs, toads, salamanders, fish, some insects. They're cold-blooded, which means not that their insides are always cold, but that their inside body temperature varies depending on the outside temperature. So if it's hot outside, their insides are hot. If it's warm outside, their insides are warm. If it's cold outside, their insides are cold. And this can potentially cause some problems. We can always function, so I need to, take a break or sweat or bundle up, but we can always function no matter the temperature outside. We just might have to make some accommodations for it. If it's too hot or too cold, these guys can't function because their insides are like, whoa, it's too cold for me, or whoa, it's too hot for me. That's why you might see some reptiles in the shade or sunning themselves to get warm. They just can't function without it. So that means we're thinking about winter. They actually can't really function in the wintertime if it gets too cold. So if you're scared of reptiles, amphibians, those sorts of critters, go outside if it's below about 50 degrees, potentially 55 degrees, and you're not very likely to see them because it's too cold for them. They can't function. They actually do their own version of hibernating during the wintertime. I say their own version because it's not exactly the same as the bear, but they might find a little hole. Here's some lizards in a little hole. They might stick together. Other animals was on the list. Bear is at the top of the food chain, so not much is going to bother them, but something might bother a snake or a lizard. So they like to bundle up together for security, and they sleep through the winter. But the nice thing is, because they're cold-blooded, they don't have to eat all the time. So they can actually go for months in the winter without eating. They don't have to do all that prep work with the food. And actually, if you ever do get a pet reptile, which if you do, just keep in mind, they can live for a very long time, 20, 30, 40 years. So just keep that in mind. But if you ever do have a pet, sometimes don't you feed them more than once a week, once every 2 weeks? Depends on the animal. But snakes, I know it's only about once a week, once every 2 weeks. And that's because they're cold-blooded. So it's an adaptation, but it's more like a lifestyle as well, these cold-blooded animals. I still think because it's so different from what we're used to, it's worthy of a power pose. So please give me your pose for the snake and how strange the cold-blooded animals are. All right. So let me look back at our list here. We have the sleeping with the hibernating. We have sheltering. We have food. We have water. But we also should talk about dealing with the snow and shelter from predators. We haven't super talked about that yet. So with that in mind, I'm going to move us over to the rabbit. All right, we got this lovely rabbit and the owl going after the rabbit. Give me a reaction, or again, talk about it with your students. Who here thinks this rabbit is blending in okay right now with this background? Give me a reaction. All right, seeing some thumbs up and celebratory responses to that. Cool. Yeah, I think it's pretty well camouflaged as well. Camouflage is whenever something blends in with the background. Could be your clothes, could be an animal, anything like that blends in, hard to see. Perfect for hiding from predators like maybe this owl. Problem is, as I said, we get snow. And if you're a brown rabbit and there's snow on the ground, it's going to be pretty easy for the owl to spot you. So not all animals do this, but some rabbits, the critter that was over there, the marten, through the bear also does this. A couple birds do this too. They live in the ground. They will not change their fur color, but shed their fur and grow a new one. So I like to do a little bit of miming activity for this one. You can join in if you want. I want you to go ahead and take off your summer coat and toss it to the ground. That's just like the rabbit shedding its fur, its summer fur, and just kind of letting it go. But it can't be bald, it has to have some fur. So then I want you to pretend to pick up your biggest, puffiest winter jacket, put it on, maybe zip it up, put on a hood. And the rabbit in the wintertime will grow a brand new coat of fur that is white and a lot thicker and warmer than its usual summer coat. And coat is the term we use to describe its fur. It's kind of interchangeable. It camouflages, it keeps it warm. Two things, when we talk about safety from predators, but that's how it can deal with the snow as well. And the trigger for this is not so much that snow starts falling, it's lack of sunlight. A true sign of winter is there's less and less sun in the sky. So when that happens, sheds its coat, grows a new one. When more and more sun starts to come back, it does the opposite, it grows its summer coat. So that does mean, unfortunately, if the weather is different, like potentially from climate change, sometimes the rabbits might change more quickly than is really beneficial. And so this is an adaptation that's very beneficial for now, but it might not always be beneficial. We'll have to see how much our weather changes, but it's still really cool. So please do your pose for the rabbit with its changing, not fur color so much as it's shedding strategically and growing a new coat. Okay, I want to talk more about the food and the snow and the preparation that comes along with that. So I'm going to migrate over here to our birds and squirrels. Okay. We have a couple different interesting superpowers, aka adaptation, that comes with this tree. I'm going to start with this squirrel, and this squirrel is going to represent multiple squirrels in the park. We don't have taxidermy of every single thing, so this guy is going to represent a bunch of different squirrels. One of the squirrels we have here is a ground squirrel. So they live on the ground, kind of makes sense. They have a less fluffy tail because they don't need it as much for balancing in the trees. They make burrows in the ground. If you've ever seen a hole in the ground, that could have been from a ground squirrel. And they bury food, just like how this tree has stuff in it. They bury food for the wintertime. They know there's not enough food around for them to survive on their own in the winters. They have to prepare and plan ahead. So they dig a hole in the ground, put something in, cover it up, dig another hole in the ground, put something in, cover it up. And they're not going to remember all of them, which you might think is a bad thing, like that's a waste of time. But the nice thing is that means trees or other plants that they're burying are going to grow. And therefore, they'll actually have more food in the future because they left some seeds in there and they'll grow. So it's not the worst thing. And actually, many plants take advantage of things like squirrels burying food under the ground. Now, another thing the ground squirrel does in preparation for winter It just kind of have a knowledge of how snow kind of works. Give me a reaction. Who here has ever built anything out of snow? Or you can just raise your hands in your classroom if you've ever built anything out of the snow before. And it's okay if you haven't. All right, seeing a bunch of reactions. Many of you looks like have. These critters are smart. They know you can build stuff out of the snow. So this picture here, I didn't take it this year, so we don't have any snow yet, but you can see tracks in the snow, right? We got lots of tracks right here leading in and out of some secret tunnels. There's an entire, what we call ecosystem, a giant habitat underneath the snow called a subnivean layer, to get all fancy with you. And that's all the ground dwelling animals that store stuff under the ground and use the fact that you can build with snow to create these little shelters. So if you go out to a park and there's snow everywhere, still stay on the trails, stay in designated snow play areas, because there's a bunch of hidden underground, basically tunnel fortresses for the ground dwelling critters, and they want to be able to use that and not get stepped on. So keep that in mind, and also definitely look for tracks and little holes in the ground if you ever go out in the snow, because it's fun to see what might be underneath there. Now, one last thing I want to mention before we take our little ending bit for questions and do a little bit of a wrap up, because we are nearing the end of our time. I want to talk about the animals that say forget it. I don't want to be here. So far, we've talked about animals hiding from predators, animals dealing with snow, animals prepping for the wintertime. But some animals just don't even want to deal with the winter or deal with all the bad stuff that might come with it. For example, some of our songbirds. They migrate, which is a word I dropped earlier. They fly away. They're like, you know what? There's a whole wide world here. And not everywhere in the world is going to be as cold or as annoying, or as difficult to handle as the wintertime. Sometimes they just go down the mountain, because if you go down the mountain here, it's going to get warmer. Some birds, though, when it's winter up here, it's summer down there. We're in California, right around there. They'll say, bye-bye, I'm going to fly down here, get my summer fix again. And when that season starts to change and it gets to fall and then to winter, they come back up here. They just fly back and forth. And they have different adaptations in order to make sure the flight works pretty well. They might have really good feathers. They might have very good wings. They might know which places to stop at that still has food. There's a wide assortment of adaptations to make sure they can migrate to continually find what they want to find. All the stuff that we talked about, more space, more food, more water, shelter, all sorts of good stuff. So this is gonna be our final batch of superpower moves. We gotta do two, because I talked about the squirrel related stuff and the bird related stuff. So let's do one for the squirrel and one more for the bird. All right, y'all. I want to leave you with something. I'm going to grab the list again. We talked about most of these. We can talk about all of them. It's really hard to get through a list this good. But one adaptation I want to talk about for us is our brain. Go ahead and point to your brain, please. I mentioned our thumbs already. Our brain is a really amazing adaptation that humans have. It's the reason why I can do this program with you all. We're very, very smart because of our brain. So I want you to use your brain, think about all the stuff that we learned about and how you can actually learn about these animal adaptations and know more about how to protect these animals, how to visit parks in ways that make sure that they are still comfortable in their home. So thank you for joining me, everyone. Feel free now, if you've been waiting patiently, to put your questions in the Q&A. I'll be around for another about 5 minutes or so. This is technically a 45-minute program. If we have a bunch of questions, I do linger after to answer those questions. I can't linger for too long, though. So thank you again for joining me. And I do want to say, this has been recorded. I couldn't live stream it on YouTube, but it is recorded and we put on YouTube later on. So if you want to rewatch it for any reason, or if you know someone had to left halfway through, it'll be up. It'll take a few days because our internet isn't great for uploading, but it will be up there. All right. So take care or ask me some questions. And again, I'm only going to be answering questions via Q&A. I'm not going to be, unmuting anyone or turning on anyone's camera. Where do rabbits stay in the winter versus the summer? So it tends to be about the same in terms of they could be underground in like a burrow. They just might create an underground burrow using snow tunnels as well. So it tends to be about the same. They do, I mentioned about the squirrels storing food. They do also store food under the ground. They do need to come out sometimes, and that's why they need to have that change of fur to camouflage in with the snow. How often do rabbits shed their fur? So in terms of doing it as like a mass process, it doesn't happen like in one day. It happens over a period of time. So you might see rabbits or other animals that do this process with chunks of white fur, chunks of brown fur, because not everything is shed all at once. But they do it twice in terms of doing it as a kind of like big chunks. They do it in the fall or early winter, and they do it again in late winter or early spring. That being said, we all mammals shed at least a little bit of fur or hair. Maybe you've combed your hair before and come out with some like strands. We're constantly shedding our fur and our hair. It's just the rabbits do it twice in like those bigger chunks to do with that adaptation. What animals are visible in the meadow area at Big Trees? Yes. So I didn't introduce you to the whole area of a park. We do have a meadow that is only about a 5-minute walk from this museum. It's technically that way if you ever come visit. It's over there. You'll see a bunch of different kinds of insects. I didn't even talk much about insects here because we have so many of them, but we have lots of flowers that accommodate the insects, lots of different kinds of birds and songbirds. The deer go through there. We sometimes see big kind of dents in the flowers or grass where they've slept for the night. The bears also like to walk through there. Because we have creeks that go through the meadow, we have lots of our frogs and other amphibians over there too. How have humans affected the animals in your state park? The big question. So I'm going to focus in on one animal, then maybe talk about a couple others. So the bear, I'll walk over to our bear, has been impacted by our state park, not nearly though as much as bears in like Yosemite or Tahoe. Bears are incredibly smart. They're opportunistic eaters, which means they'll eat whatever. They're not picky. And that includes human food. So you often see bears in the campground because they know people sometimes leave out their food. We haven't had many negative bear-human interactions, and we haven't had bears break into cars here. But there was a story last summer of a woman putting her food into her bear box, which is what you're supposed to do, keeps your food secure. In the middle of her doing that, bear just walked right up to her, took a bag of apples out of the back of her car, and just walked away. So the bears have become a bit used to people and therefore are not as scared as people as we would like, because they could accidentally hurt somebody. But it's nowhere near as bad as the bears in places where people really haven't been putting away their food, like Tahoe, or in the past, Yosemite used to just put out the trash and have bears come eat. Now they don't do that because they know it's bad for the bears. But that's kind of a classic example. Other animals, general disturbances. I mentioned the snow because lots of people go off the trail in the snow. They think they're not stepping on anything because it's just snow when they're really crushing a bunch of tunnels. We don't know how it's impacting the animals, but it definitely does something. Where do deers go in the winter? That's a very good question. And honestly, I can't say this for certainty because I haven't asked our wildlife biologists about this, but I assume a lot of them just go down the mountain. They do like a mini migration where there's less snow because I never usually see them in the wintertime. And last winter we had well over 8 feet of snow. It was a lot. And I didn't see any, nor did I see any tracks. When there's a light dusting of snow, like 2 years ago, we didn't have a bunch of snow. I would see their tracks. But last year, I think they went down the mountain. But that's a good question. I'm not positive. That's just my theory. Do male and female mountain lions look the same? Yes, they do. If we want to get technical, there's something called sexual dimorphism. Ooh, that's just a term for when the males and females look different. So like a peacock is this really big, bright blue bird, but the female version of that bird, which is called a peahen, is all brown and different. Mountain lions don't tend to look any different. Some animals look crazy different, some animals don't. How thick does a rabbit's fur grow? It's not the thickest of any animal. Otters actually have some of the thickest fur because they live in the water, but it does grow at least significantly thicker. I can't really give you much more than just it is thicker, but it's not as thick as a water animal like an otter or a beaver or one of those guys. They have really thick fur because they're consistently in that water and that can cool them off too much. You're welcome. All right, I'll answer maybe one more question, but then I do need to get going. So I'll give you about a minute, if you're that person, to ask that question. Okay, last one. How many types of mammals do you have in the state park? I couldn't even tell you, because this is only some of the mammals and birds. We don't have any amphibians here. We don't have any of the insects here. We only have a few of the reptiles. So hundreds, especially if you consider species. But we have all the different kinds because we also have the river otter, which means river otter. I can't quite see it. The river otter. So we also have lots of types of fish and water bugs, hundreds. Maybe not the answer you're looking for, but we have a lot. All right, everybody. I do need to get going. I actually have another program after this one. Busy day. But take care. Good questions. Thank you for participating. And again, this will be on YouTube within the next few days. So have a good rest of your day. All right. Bye.